You ever look at a business decision and just go, what were they thinking? It happens, right? Way more often than you'd think. You see these really smart, super experienced leaders make calls that just don't make sense. So the real question isn't just why it happens, but, how can we avoid falling into those exact same traps? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to build a toolkit to help you do just that.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the ideal, the textbook way to make a decision, and then contrast it with the messy reality we all live in. Then we'll play detective and diagnose the three main culprits behind bad choices: the hidden traps inside our own minds, the crazy pressures of the real world, and, of course, the flawed systems we often work in. And don't worry, we'll wrap it all up by putting together a practical toolkit that you can actually start using right away.
So first things first, we've got to understand the playing field, because there's this massive gap between how decisions should be made in theory and how they actually go down in the real world.
In a perfect world, right, we'd all follow this model. It's so logical, it's linear, it's clean. You just define the problem, you brainstorm every single possible solution, you weigh all the pros and cons for each one, and then you pick the absolute best, most optimal choice. Sounds simple, doesn't it?
Well, that naturally leads to the million-dollar question. If making the perfect choice is just this simple step-by-step process, why does it feel completely impossible most of the time? The answer, it turns out, lies in one really powerful concept.
And here it is, bounded rationality. This idea comes from the economist Herbert Simon, and it is a total game changer. What it says is, yeah, we try to be rational, we want to be logical, but we're always bumping up against our limits. We have limited time, we never have all the information, and let's face it, we only have so much brain power. The key insight here is that this isn't some kind of personal flaw, it's just part of the human condition. And getting this is the first step, because it's this gap between the ideal and the real that opens the door to our first set of barriers.
Okay, so if our rationality is bounded, what fills in the gaps? Well, that's where we start digging into the mind's hidden traps. We're talking about cognitive biases. These are predictable, systematic errors in the way we think. You can think of them as mental shortcuts that are basically hardwired into our brains. And most of the time they're helpful, but sometimes, oh boy, sometimes they lead us completely off a cliff.
First up is the big one, confirmation bias. The best way to think about this is like a filter. Once you have an idea in your head that you kind of like, your brain automatically starts searching for any piece of evidence that proves you're right, while at the same time conveniently ignoring or downplaying anything that suggests you might be wrong.
And man, once you know what to look for, you see this play out at work all the time. You're championing a new project, and you naturally find yourself paying way more attention to the good news and maybe brushing off the bad news. Or you're interviewing someone, and you get a good vibe, so you start focusing only on their strengths and kind of gloss over their weaknesses. It's a really subtle force, but it's so powerful in reinforcing our gut feelings, and sometimes it can blind us to what's really going on.
So, how do we fight back? You can't just wish it away. You have to be intentional. You have to actively ask the question, what information out there would prove me wrong? And here's a great trick. In your next team meeting, formally assign someone the role of devil's advocate. Their only job is to argue against whatever the popular opinion is. It forces the whole group to actually confront the counterarguments head-on.
All right, next up is a trap that gets even the most seasoned managers, overconfidence. This is our natural tendency to believe we're more correct and way more precise than we actually are. It's that little voice in our head that says, "Don't worry about it, I got this." And this is the root cause of the infamous planning fallacy. Those projects that are always late and always over budget. It's what leads to those super aggressive revenue forecasts that are pure fantasy, and it causes us to dismiss any conservative scenario as just being too pessimistic. It feels great to be confident, but it can be absolutely disastrous for a business.
So the fix here is all about grounding yourself in reality. Instead of asking, how long will this take, ask, how long did the last 5 projects just like this one take? And stop accepting single-point estimates, like it'll be done by October 15th. No way. Instead, demand a range. We're about 80% confident it'll be done sometime between October 10th and November 5th. It's just more honest, and it's a heck of a lot more useful.
And finally, for this section, let's talk about anchoring bias. The very first piece of information dropped in a negotiation, whether it's a budget, a salary, a deadline, it acts like an anchor. It has this incredible magnetic pull, and the entire rest of the conversation gets stuck right around that initial figure, even if that figure was totally arbitrary.
The fix is pretty simple, though. If you're going into a negotiation, try to be the one to set the first, well-researched anchor. And if you can't, you have to consciously force yourself and your team to think about all the reasons why that anchor might be wrong before you even start the discussion.
Now, these mental traps, they don't exist in a vacuum, right? Let's zoom out a bit and look at the external forces that can make them 100 times worse. Because even if you have perfect self-awareness, the pressures of the real world, like time, uncertainty, and conflict, can just hijack our best intentions.
Urgency is the absolute enemy of a good decision. When that clock is ticking down, our brain basically switches from deep, careful analysis mode into survival mode. We just default to those mental shortcuts we were talking about. We fall back on what's familiar, and we completely stop looking for creative solutions. A key skill for any manager is learning to tell the difference between what's genuinely urgent and what just feels urgent.
This brings us to a really crucial point about conflict. You know, we're all taught to think that all conflict is bad, but that's just not true. Disagreeing about an idea or a process, that's called task conflict, and it is absolutely essential for making strong decisions. It's good. The danger zone is when it becomes personal. That's relationship conflict, and it just destroys trust. The real art of great management is encouraging that healthy debate on ideas while policing the line to make sure it never ever gets personal.
Okay, we've looked inside our own minds, we've looked at the pressures all around us. For our last diagnostic area, we need to look at the system itself, the organization. Because sometimes the problem isn't the person, it's the maze they're being forced to navigate every day.
A classic organizational trap is something called groupthink. This is what happens when the desire for everyone to get along completely overrides a realistic, critical look at the alternatives. You've got to look for these warning signs. Is silence being mistaken for agreement? Does anyone who dares to speak up get subtly, or not so subtly, shut down? If that's happening, you're not getting the best ideas from your team. You're just getting conformity.
And groupthink isn't the only problem. Sometimes the very structure of the company works against good decisions. Like, for instance, information gets trapped in these departmental silos, so the marketing folks have no idea what the engineering team is struggling with. Or maybe the incentive plans reward hitting quarterly numbers, even if it means sacrificing the long-term health of the company. And in a really rigid hierarchy, the junior employees, the ones who are often closest to the customer or the problem, can be too intimidated to ever raise a red flag.
Okay, we have diagnosed the problems, we have seen the traps in our minds, the pressures from the world, and the flaws in our systems. So now, for the most important part, let's build the toolkit to fight back.
Look, this isn't about becoming a perfect decision maker overnight. That's impossible. It's about designing a better system for making decisions. And it starts with being super explicit about how you decide things. It means you treat a $10 million strategic choice totally different than a routine tactical one. It means you actually schedule postmortems not to assign blame, but to actually learn. And crucially, it means building diverse teams and rewarding people for long-term thinking and for having the guts to speak truth to power.
7 core principles. Just let that number sink in for a second. These aren't just little band-aids. These are the actual building blocks for creating an entire system where better decisions are just the natural outcome.
And this quote, it just sums it all up perfectly. Your job as a manager isn't to be immune to these barriers, because nobody is. Your real job is to make them visible, to design processes that counteract them, and to build the habits in yourself and in your team that lead to clearer thinking.
So I'm going to leave you with this question. As you think about your own team, your own organization, which of these barriers? Is it a cognitive bias? Is it time pressure? Is it groupthink? Which one is the most active? And even more importantly, what is one small concrete step you can take this week to start building a defense against it?